We all like to think we'd act bravely when it counts, but the truth is, most of us freeze long before we ever face danger. The boss calls unexpectedly, a big idea needs pitching, a moral line gets crossed, and suddenly our heart races, our brain scrambles, and our courage vanishes. Modern life rarely asks us to face lions, but it constantly tests our nerve. The challenge isn't danger itself, it's uncertainty. We live in what scholars call an uncertainty crisis, surrounded by shifting technologies, unstable economies, and social upheaval. Our brains respond to all this unpredictability by triggering fear, often long before we realize it. And when fear takes the wheel, boldness disappears. But courage isn't the absence of fear, it's taking action despite it. With the right tools, we can train our minds to stay calm under pressure, build tolerance for uncertainty, and move forward even when the outcome is unclear. That shift changes how we live, lead, and connect. Real courage is about everyday choices. Speaking up when silence is safer, trying again when failure feels fresh, and standing by your values when they're tested. Once you learn how to build those muscles, boldness becomes a way of life. In an age of constant uncertainty, courage has become a necessity, not just for those in charge, but for everyone trying to live and work with integrity. But courage isn't what most people think it is. It's not about fearlessness. It's about action in the presence of fear. Fear is hardwired into the brain. Whenever you face the unknown, your survival instincts kick in. The amygdala fires up, hijacking your thinking and activating what most people know as fight, flight, or freeze. But in reality, most people don't fight. They freeze, hesitate, or retreat, not because they're weak, but because they're human. In fact, fear is the default. Courage is the exception. We often imagine courage as something you either have or you don't, but research shows that it's something you can develop, especially once you understand what's actually happening in your body and mind. When fear shows up, it's usually because of two things: uncertainty and a loss of control. That combination short-circuits confidence and keeps people stuck. What's worse is that we often blame ourselves for feeling afraid. We compare ourselves to others who seem braver or bolder. But most of the time, those people aren't fearless either. They've just learned to respond to fear differently, by stepping toward it, not away from it. This shift in mindset is critical, because the modern world doesn't just reward boldness, it requires it. In work, leadership, creativity, and relationships, the most meaningful choices often involve discomfort and risk. Choosing not to act, not to speak up, or not to try is the greater cost. And yet, many people opt for safety, because they think courage means being unshakable. It doesn't. Courage is messy. Sometimes it looks like whistleblowing. Sometimes it looks like standing up to a bully. Sometimes it's launching a project with no guarantee it'll work. And sometimes it's admitting you were wrong and making things right. In every case, the courageous choice is made not because fear is absent, but because something else is stronger, a sense of purpose, conviction, or clarity. This is the paradox of fear. It's universal, but it doesn't have to be permanent. If you can name it, frame it, and work with it, you can act more boldly than you thought possible. The key is not pushing harder, but resourcing better. That's where our framework in this summary begins, with the recognition that boldness is a muscle and that you already have everything you need to build it. Most people assume courageous acts come from extraordinary people, but boldness doesn't belong to the brave few. It's something anyone can build, one small shift at a time. In fact, courageous people often look ordinary until a challenge reveals their preparation. As we've already covered, what sets the bold apart isn't a lack of fear. So what does? In a word, habits, ways of thinking and acting that help them work with fear rather than freeze in it. These habits form the inner foundation of boldness. It starts with the stories we tell ourselves. When something feels risky or uncertain, most people default to protective narratives. What if I fail? Or this isn't the right time. But courageous people craft different stories. They lean into meaning. They ask themselves, what matters more than my fear right now? Coping with fear is not about denying it, but reframing it. So the story shifts from this is too much to this is worth it. Understanding is the next step. Uncertainty feels overwhelming when it's vague. The trick is to reduce the fog, one step at a time. Bold people don't barrel forward blindly. They gather information, run experiments, and ask questions. Just like a firefighter edging into smoke, they move forward carefully, making sense of what they see, using knowledge to quiet panic. They also don't go it alone. Boldness is rarely a solo act. Behind most courageous decisions is a network, people who offer emotional backup, critical feedback, or simply stand beside you. Knowing that someone has your back can be the difference between silence and speaking up, between quitting and staying the course. Then comes purpose. Acting bravely often comes down to conviction, a personal why that makes discomfort worth facing. For some, it's a deep belief in a cause. For others, it's simply the need to stay in integrity with themselves. Either way, courage often blooms when inaction feels worse than risk. Confidence matters too, not the loud, overconfident kind, but the quiet belief that you can figure things out. That belief builds through action. Courageous people create micro-wins. They rehearse worst-case scenarios so they don't feel unprepared. They collect evidence that they've done hard things before. That's what makes them ready to act, not because they know they'll succeed, but because they trust their own resilience. Finally, there's calm. Fear speeds everything up, your heart, your thoughts, your reflexes. Calm slows things down. People who act boldly tend to have rituals or mental habits that keep them grounded in times of chaos. Some reframe the situation, others use humor, some simply breathe. Whatever the method, calm creates clarity, and clarity opens space for courage. All of these traits are learnable. They're not personality quirks, but practices, and they work best in combination. Together, they form the skill set that transforms fear into fuel. Boldness doesn't live only inside individuals. It thrives in relationships, teams, and organizations. Courage, in short, is contagious. When one person dares to act, it invites others to do the same. And when a group shares a deep sense of safety, meaning, and purpose, they can take risks that no individual could carry alone. This is where the 3 C's of courage come in. They speak to the power of collective boldness, how we create environments where fear doesn't rule, and where people are energized to act from strength, not self-protection. It starts with clan, the bonds of belonging. People are more willing to take risks when they feel deeply connected to others. This isn't just about being liked. It's about trust, safety, and psychological loyalty. In bold cultures, people don't feel alone. They know that if they speak up, they won't be shamed or exiled. They'll be heard. This kind of connection doesn't happen automatically. It has to be nurtured through empathy, shared vulnerability, and a commitment to mutual support. Then there's charisma, not in the traditional flashy sense, but as emotional energy. Bold cultures generate emotional momentum. They tap into hope, possibility, even joy. Leaders play a big role here. When they bring energy to hard situations, framing challenges as opportunities or showing passion for a shared mission, they shift the tone from fear to forward motion. This energy is magnetic. It brings people along, even when the path is uncertain. Finally, there's culture itself, the invisible operating system that tells people what's safe, what's rewarded, and what's possible. In fear-based cultures, people avoid risk. They self-censor. They stick to what's been done before. But in courageous cultures, people are encouraged to challenge the status quo. They're praised for effort, not just outcome. They're trusted to use their judgment, even when the answer isn't clear. That kind of culture doesn't come from slogans. It comes from signals, the daily actions, norms, and choices that shape how people behave. It's built when leaders reward curiosity instead of punishing mistakes, when feedback flows in both directions, when accountability coexists with grace, when safety isn't just a word on a values poster, but a real, embodied feeling. The boldest teams don't avoid fear. They normalize it and move through it. They know that uncertainty is part of growth. They know that setbacks are part of innovation. And they know that if they keep showing up for each other, they can handle more than they ever thought possible. Bold cultures don't wait for a fearless leader. They create space for ordinary people to do extraordinary things together. For many people, fear feels like a flaw, a sign that they're weak, not ready, or not built for big things. But as we've learned, fear isn't a problem to eliminate. It's a part of being human. In fact, it's one of the most consistent companions on the path to courage. Fear arises when uncertainty and a loss of control come together. That combination triggers the brain's most ancient survival systems, making us freeze, flee, or shut down. And in modern life, we experience this not just in crisis, but in meetings, in difficult conversations, in career decisions, in the quiet moments of self-doubt. The body doesn't know the difference between a predator in the wild and the possibility of embarrassment in a boardroom. Both feel threatening. Recognizing that fear is normal, inevitable even, is the first step toward working with it. The goal isn't to eliminate fear, but to keep it from taking the wheel. In practice, that means slowing down, getting curious, and naming what you feel instead of denying it. Ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid of here? What story am I telling myself about this fear? What's the real risk, and what's just the narrative I've added on top? Sometimes fear points to danger, but often it points to growth, the moment right before a breakthrough, a boundary, or a bold move. It's the inner alarm system saying, you're stepping outside the known. That's not a stop sign. That's a sign that something new is about to begin. The emotional terrain of courage is messy. It's vulnerable, uncertain, and full of inner noise, but it's also where people reconnect with their purpose. Courage often comes from this kind of deep conviction, the sense that you have to do something because you won't like who you become if you don't. That clarity doesn't always arrive all at once. Sometimes it's built moment by moment, through support, preparation, and repeated choices to act in alignment with values, not just comfort. And sometimes the most important courage is private. It's walking away from something that looks impressive but feels wrong. It's speaking up when everyone else is silent. It's getting back up after a failure, even when nobody sees it. Fear never disappears, but when it's understood, when it's met with self-awareness, support, and steady action, it becomes less of a wall and more of a doorway. On the other side is not fearlessness, but freedom. The ability to live, work, and lead from something deeper than anxiety or avoidance. The most radical message here is also the most hopeful. Courage is not a fixed trait reserved for the exceptional few. It's a learnable skill, a psychological and emotional capacity that can be cultivated deliberately by individuals, teams, and organizations alike. And like any capacity, it develops not through grand gestures, but through repeated, intentional practice. Courage is built the way strength is, by stretching just beyond your current limits, resting, recovering, and then going again. It thrives on small wins, moments where you act despite discomfort, uncertainty, or doubt. Over time, these small acts form new defaults. What once felt impossible becomes doable. What once triggered hesitation becomes familiar terrain. This applies just as much to organizations as to individuals. Courageous cultures aren't created by accident. They're designed. Bold companies normalize experimentation, reward calculated risk, and model transparency from the top down. They don't just tolerate vulnerability, they embed it in their processes. They don't punish setbacks, they learn from them publicly. In these environments, people don't just feel allowed to be courageous, they feel expected to be. And that expectation becomes self-fulfilling. Courage, in this context, spreads through modeling, through language, and through shared stories. A courageous act by one person empowers another. This is the quiet momentum behind bold teams and brave leadership. People drawing strength from one another and pushing each other to grow. It's also where purpose comes back into play. When people are anchored in meaning, when they feel their work serves something real, they become more willing to tolerate discomfort and risk. They have a reason to stretch themselves. They don't just act to protect their status, they act to protect their values. And that shift in motivation is key. At its core, this is what bold organizations and individuals alike need to do. Instead of waiting for courage to strike, they need to lean in and learn how to build it, slowly, methodically, systemically. Whether you're facing a difficult conversation, a moral crossroads, or a moment of reinvention, the call is the same. Courage is possible, and it's yours to grow.